Welcome back to my playlist. Today's song is Love of My Life by Queen, featuring, of course, Freddie's inimitable voice and delivery. This is a song, it's one of the very first songs I listened to in this entire journey. And
The first.
is it the first? It might. Okay, I remember there was Queen's Love of My Life, and then there was Beatles' She's Leaving Home, and you chose them both because they featured harp. And they have both remained on my playlist to this day. However, I'm going to say that it is not because of the harp that they stay on my playlist. This song is such an embodiment of elegance and passion. It's really Mozartian, isn't it? That piano intro, which in my first listen and in-depth look at the song way back when, I talked a lot about the Mozartian elements of it, the delicate piano, classical style accompaniment, the plucked guitar, of course, with the addition of the romantic lushness of the harp arpeggios and glissandi as we get as the piece gets underway. This comparison between Mozart and Love of My Life, which I talked about way back then. To this day, I still feel like, in fact, the longer I live with this song, the more reasons I find to equate it with Mozart, even beyond these immediately obvious aesthetic elements that I brought up then. For example, as much as I know that this piece is called a ballad, when I stop to try to think about, really, where does it fit? Not just within the rock genre, but overall, musically, across all genres, it's timeless. It transcends genre. It transcends pigeonholing it in one era or one style. I start thinking of some of Mozart's arias, some of those arias that we could say border on the divine from his operas. Somehow, I feel like this song, Love of My Life, holds such a depth of passion and beauty that I think it fits just as easily alongside Mozart's arias as anywhere else that we could try to place it. Just listen to a little bit of this particular aria by Mozart and tell me if you don't hear any common ground. There is such special attention given to the instrumental tonal colorings in this piece, the restraint and incredible detail in musical ornamentation, the way everything flows so seamlessly across each transition, and of course the lyrics too. Back to Mozart. What about this text from another Mozart aria? The translation goes something like this. Ah, I can feel it. Love's happiness is fled forever. Nevermore, O hours of bliss, will you return to my heart. See, Tamino, these tears flow for you alone, beloved. If you do not feel love's yearning, I shall find peace in death. Now, think about how Love of My Life expresses much the same sentiment. Love of my life, you've hurt me, you've broken my heart, and now you leave me. Love of my life, can't you see? I mean, the comparisons are everywhere. If I were to focus on the instrumental elements of this piece, I'd also have to compare it to Mozart. Again, take a moment and listen to the Andante from Mozart's clarinet concerto. And I think you might be able to notice similarities in tonal coloring, in the refinement of the instrumentation, the depth of emotional expression. And sure, okay, I understand. Love of My Life is not anywhere near as grand in scale. It's not meant to be. But I do think it holds up in its own way against these timeless classical works. And so, if I were asked to place it somewhere, genre, style, I would say it's in the timeless collection. Now, I'm not saying that I like this song simply because it's like Mozart's music, which of course is very familiar to me, if it were simply because it's like Mozart's music, why don't I just go listen to Mozart? Why do I need to find a rehash of Mozart? That is not the case. What I'm saying is, I find myself drawn to it for many of the same reasons that I appreciate Mozart's works. One of the things I've noticed about this song is how it avoids sounding square by an occasional insertion of a non-4/4 bar. What I mean is, the piece is primarily based around 4 beats in sequence. But sometimes, instead of the repeating sequence of 4 beats and 4 beats and 4 beats, sometimes there is a little insertion, a break of the pattern, where there are only 3 beats, or sometimes only 2 beats. And it really changes it up so that we never get to lock into a groove or repeated rhythmic pattern to the point that we are just nodding along, tapping along. It keeps it out of that rut. The location of the strong beat in each bar is changed frequently enough so that we experience the whole song as a sort of gliding, floating along. And this inconsistency of the pulse pattern balances against the strongly organized, classical-like piano accompaniment pattern and the very, very traditional chord scheme. Speaking of chords, there's something interesting about what's going on harmonically as well. Just take a look at the first line of the introduction here. We start out in the key of F major. This is our home key. Well, I said this song is based around some incredibly traditional chord harmonic design. And so I'm going to be using some language here, but I want to keep it simple. So I want you to understand. Home, where we start, is F. It's this black string. Another place that we end up using as a second home is C. That's the red string. And so one of the beautiful things about this song is the way it travels from one home to another. And it creates this wonderful effect where we always feel secure, but we never feel locked in statically. There is always a sense of motion and movement and travel. So the first thing that happens at the very beginning, as the piano introduction starts us off in its wonderfully elegant manner, it is starting us off by establishing and emphasizing over and over, this is our home. We hear, oh, funny, I have a piece of paper on my thumb. We hear, this is the chord structure. You hear how strongly anchored we are in arriving at home. It feels like it could be the ending. It feels like it could be asserting the final statement. But instead, it is setting us up with this incredibly strong sense of location. For good reason, because then we start to travel. And it isn't very long, just within the piano introduction, before the verse comes in, that we've moved from this as our home. This is our first home. This is the F home. This is the beginning and the ending home. So it's our primary residence, we could say. Our secondary residence is here. And once we've established our primary residence here, the chords of the piano are taking us through a sequence as the piano introduction continues on. And we have this wonderful trill. And listen what's happening here. We have this root note, which is staying there, and we have that's not taking us home where we started. This is taking us home here. That is our secondary home. So we began establishing our primary residence. Now we ended the introduction, the piano introduction, arriving solidly at our secondary residence. And if I were going to use musical terms, we arrive at the dominant, the key of C major, the red string, if you want to call it. And that's the point at which we get to hear the verse begin, meaning the verse doesn't begin, the voice doesn't enter at our primary residence. The voice enters at our secondary residence, at our second home. And if we compare the placement of each of these homes, we notice that the first one is a bit lower in pitch. The second one is a bit higher in pitch. And so it is one of the things that makes it feel as if this opening, when Freddie's voice enters and sings, it feels a bit as if it's suspended and hovering in midair, even though it's so anchored in traditional harmony. Love of my life. And we immediately fall down to a minor there. You've hurt me. So we have a major on Love of my life. And then we have a minor, more melancholy on. And that melancholy continues. And then we have the very assertive, driving us back on and suspending us in midair here. And when we sing this, can't you see? And he hangs here. Isn't it ironic that on C, on this word C, that is what was our primary residence, but it no longer feels like that because we are still singing, we are living in this secondary residence location, musically speaking. And it's so fascinating to notice how the harmonies and the progressions and the chords that are used are placed so appropriately, so effectively, that they shape the lyrics. To have love of my life, the opening line, feeling suspended because we're in our secondary residence, which is not so anchored, and then to have it suddenly darken and become melancholy when it says, you've hurt me. And to keep that melancholy quality, the minor quality, you've broken my heart. And now you leave me. That now you leave me is a rather epic moment. It's dramatic. And now you leave me. Love of my life. There we return back to that secondary home. Can't you see? And when we say, can't you see? That chord is a sort of questioning moment in the scheme of the harmonic scheme. You hear the lift. You hear it feel as if it's lifted up again. Can't you see? Just like when we say, can't you see? It's a question. It lingers in the air. And so even these incredibly traditional, it's even more than traditional, classic and unadventurous chord progressions are taken far beyond the mechanics, and they become part of this creation of this timelessly beautiful piece of music. And isn't it nice how the line, bring it back, comes just before we start to feel ourselves being harmonically taken back home, beginning the journey harmonically back to our primary residence. Well, let's see if I can show this to you in a way that makes sense. So remember, we've been at our secondary residence. This has been our home, and we've just left ourselves suspended here. Love of my life, can't you see? And now, bring it back. Bring it back. That's the plea. Bring it back. Bring it back. Where do we find ourselves first hinted at, hearing the first musical hint that we are returning home? It's on the next chord. Don't take it away. And it's such an emphatic moment, because what makes the difference between these two is that our primary residence has a note called B flat, whereas our secondary residence does not. It has that brighter B. This is the key. And notice that when we start to move back towards our primary residence, start to take the journey home, the first thing that comes is a chord built on this B flat. Don't take it away from me. And that is our primary chord right here. Take it away from me. And now here becomes the B flat again. And then A minor. And then D minor again. These are the same chords, the A minor and the D minor. I'm going to say these are the melancholy chords of the piece. And we find them in both homes, in both residences. So they don't mean so much whether we hear it in the primary or secondary residence in terms of key orientation. They are coloring and shading the emotional quality. They're giving us that melancholy tone to the entire piece. But it's this moment here. Bring it back, which, by the way, is one of the melancholy chords. That's the other melancholy chord. And here the journey begins. You hear how that happens? It's such a beautiful timing of lyrics and harmonic progression that it's again, it transcends the technicalities of it. Now, a bit more about the instruments and the balance and the coloring. You know, it's interesting to me that one of the special little instrumental details that I always find myself noticing is actually the bass line when he's singing this, bring it back, bring it back. Somehow, that bass in that moment is an incredibly special part of this song, even though it's not at all the focal point. But its presence there, every time I listen to it, it catches my ears. And then, of course, the guitar. It's the inimitable Brian May. If I were going to go with sort of classical terminology, I'd call Brian May's guitar the clarinet of this song. As much as I love his chorus, his choral sound, the parts that really stand out to me in this song are those little insertions, not quite solo sections, but just stepping into the edge of the spotlight for a few seconds between, and sometimes overlapping with the vocal lines. Like, for example, when we're coming into You Will Remember, and you hear how the guitar leads us into that, or coming out of I Still Love You, and then the guitar carries on and carries on. And then when we do get to the clarinet guitar solo, I also really enjoy not just the guitar, but the piano part there. It picks up, it gets lively, more animated, but not really in a celebratory way. And as I've been thinking about how do I feel this piano part, the accompaniment here to the guitar solo, I started to think, you know, the way I would explain it in words would be to say it's a bit like it feels like the piano is running around, kind of desperately trying to find its way out of this place it's in, as if it's locked in a room, locked in a place and needs to escape. A kind of expression of panic. It also seems very appropriate to the sentiment expressed in this song. And then when the song finally comes to an end, and I say finally, not because it's a terribly long song, but because it takes us on such a journey. When it finally comes to an end, Freddie's last words are sung on these minor chords, these melancholy chords. Love of my life. That's the last thing he sings. He doesn't bring it to its conclusion. His voice, even his thoughts, even the thoughts expressed in the lyrics, kind of trail off there as if he simply can't go any further and is left to the instruments, the guitar and the piano, to bring it to a harmonic conclusion, to finish the song for him. And that also is so tender and beautiful. It's haunting, and it pulls at our heartstrings as we start thinking about the emotional aspect of this song. So back to this idea of classical, timeless music. This piece does an incredible job of elevating all of this above the parts and pieces, the technicalities. We can analyze the harmonies. We can find beautiful things there. We can analyze the melody, the instruments, all of that. Of course, Freddie's voice is one of the things. Also, the meter, the rhythmic elements, everything plays into this. But it becomes something that is, as a whole, is so much greater than the parts. And yet, it's incredibly beautiful to take it apart and look at these nuts and bolts of how it was created and how, in just the right circumstances, with just the right elements, it can become something so amazing as Love of My Life. Now, some of you have sometimes asked me to try to explain what it is that I find attractive or that draws me towards classical music. And this is not about defending classical music or persuading you to listen to classical music. But I will say that if you love Queen's Love of My Life, as I have fallen in love with it, I believe that you can also find the same incredible beauty and satisfaction in, well, let's just go with Mozart, because that's what I've been talking about along here. And the things that I've talked about here with Queen's Love of My Life are the same sort of things I would be talking about if we were analyzing and discussing a Mozart piece. And so this brings me back to the whole, is this a comparison of Queen and Freddie with Mozart? Yes and no. I'm not saying he's the 20th century Mozart. I'm not trying to make any of those foolish comparisons. They each stand on their own 2 feet. They are each incredible for their time, and they each created amazing, timeless, lasting works of art, one of which is Love of My Life.